Imagine discovering that the father you mourned for 15 years, the man you believed was the victim of a terrible crime, had actually been living a completely different life just 30 miles away from your childhood home. Imagine finding documents hidden in your own attic that prove your dad didn't disappear. He abandoned you. In October of 2009, Jake Roberts was cleaning out his deceased grandmother's house when he found a box of papers that would shatter everything he thought. He knew about his father's disappearance 15 years earlier. Hidden beneath old tax returns and insurance documents was evidence that Michael Roberts hadn't vanished without a trace in 1994. He had carefully planned his escape from one family to start fresh with another. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. What you're about to discover will show how the people we trust most can live double lives right under our noses, and how sometimes the most devastating truth is that there was no mystery at all, just a man who chose to walk away. This is not just a story about a missing person case. It's a story about betrayal at the deepest level, about children who spent their entire adolescence believing their father was dead, and about a mother who struggled to raise 3 kids alone, while the man who should have been helping them was building a new life with a new family. Michael Roberts left for work on the morning of March 23, 1994, kissed his wife goodbye, and told his children he'd see them at dinner. For 15 years, his family believed something terrible had happened to him. But the truth, when it finally emerged from a dusty attic box, was far more cruel than any kidnapping or accident could have been. This is the story of how 3 children discovered that their father's greatest crime wasn't disappearing. It was choosing to stay gone. Michael Roberts possessed the kind of steady, reliable presence that made neighbors feel safe and co-workers trust him implicitly. At 38 years old in March of 1994, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with broad shoulders built from 20 years in construction work, graying brown hair that he kept neatly trimmed, and kind hazel eyes that seemed to light up whenever he talked about his children. But what truly defined Michael, or what his family believed defined him, was his unwavering dedication to providing for the people he loved. Michael had grown up in a working-class family in Detroit's East Side, where his father worked at the Ford River Rouge complex, and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. He learned early that a man's worth was measured by his willingness to work hard and take care of his family, values that seemed to guide every decision he made as a young adult. In 1976, at 20 years old, Michael married Linda Thompson, a sweet-natured 19-year-old he'd met at a church social. Linda was everything Michael said he wanted in a wife: kind, nurturing, and completely devoted to the idea of building a traditional family together. Michael was the most responsible man I'd ever met, Linda would remember years later. He worked 6 days a week, never complained, and every Friday night he'd come home with his paycheck and put it right on the kitchen table. He said his job was to provide, and mine was to make our house a home. By 1994, Michael and Linda had built what appeared to be a solid, loving family. Their oldest son, Jake, was 16 and had inherited his father's height and work ethic, already talking about following Michael into the construction business. Emma, 12, was a bright, sensitive girl who adored her father and still insisted on good-night hugs every evening. Tommy, 8, was the baby of the family, an energetic boy who followed Michael around the house on weekends, desperate to help with any project his dad was working on. Michael worked as a site supervisor for Morrison Construction, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial buildings throughout the Detroit metropolitan area. He'd been with Morrison for 12 years, starting as a laborer and working his way up through sheer determination and reliability. His co-workers respected him, his boss trusted him with the most important projects, and he took pride in being the kind of man who never missed a day of work. Dad was like a machine, Jake would recall years later. Every morning at 6 o'clock, he'd get up, shower, eat the breakfast Mom made him, and leave for work. Every night at 6:30, he'd walk through that front door. You could set your watch by him. The Roberts family lived in a modest three-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street in Warren, a blue-collar suburb just outside Detroit. It wasn't fancy, but Michael had saved for 3 years to buy it, and he was proud to provide his family with a safe neighborhood where the kids could ride bikes and Linda could walk to the grocery store without worry. Michael's routine was military in its precision, but it was driven by love rather than duty. Every morning he'd wake up at 5:30, make coffee, and spend 20 minutes reviewing blueprints or project notes at the kitchen table. He'd shower, dress in his work clothes, always clean jeans, a Morrison construction t-shirt, and steel-toed boots, and eat breakfast while discussing the day ahead with Linda. Weekends were family time. Michael would take Jake to baseball practice, help Emma with her homework, and chase Tommy around the backyard until the boy collapsed in exhausted giggles. Saturday evenings were reserved for family movie nights, with everyone piled on the couch sharing popcorn and arguing good-naturedly about what to watch. Michael was the kind of father every kid deserves, their neighbor Mrs. Patterson observed. He coached Little League, he helped with school projects, and he never missed a single one of those kids' important events. When Emma had her piano recital, he sat in the front row wearing a shirt and tie, beaming like she was performing at Carnegie Hall. But perhaps most importantly to his family, Michael was completely dependable. In 18 years of marriage, he had never failed to come home when he said he would. If he was going to be late, he called. If plans changed, he explained why. His family never had to wonder where he was, or whether he was safe. This reliability made Michael's disappearance all the more shocking and inexplicable. In the weeks leading up to March 23, 1994, Michael had seemed completely normal. He'd been excited about a new project Morrison Construction had landed, a shopping center in Troy that would keep him busy through the summer. He'd talked about taking the family camping that year, maybe driving up to Mackinac Island for the first time. There was no sign anything was wrong, Linda insisted to police investigators. Michael was happy. We were happy. He was talking about the future, making plans. The night before he disappeared, he helped Tommy build a model airplane. That's not something a man does if he's planning to leave his family. Michael had also been more affectionate than usual in the days before his disappearance. He'd surprised Linda with flowers the previous weekend, telling her she deserved them just for being such a wonderful wife and mother. He'd spent extra time talking to each of the children about their plans and dreams, conversations that would later seem heartbreakingly significant. On the evening of March 22, 1994, Michael Roberts went to bed in his own house, next to the wife he'd been married to for 18 years, surrounded by the 3 children who adored him. He seemed content, settled, and completely committed to the life he'd built. Less than 12 hours later, he would walk out of that life forever, leaving behind a family who would spend the next 15 years believing he was dead, never imagining that he had simply chosen to start over somewhere else. The man who had made reliability his defining characteristic was about to become the center of one of the most baffling disappearances in Warren's history. And the truth about where he went would prove to be more devastating than any tragedy his family could have imagined. Wednesday, March 23, 1994. A day that began like thousands of others in the Roberts household, but would end with a family shattered by questions that seemed to have no answers. The morning routine in the Roberts home on Maple Street was as predictable as sunrise. Michael's alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, just as it had every weekday for the past 12 years. Linda stirred beside him as he quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake her completely, though she always drifted into that half-awake state where she could hear him moving through his morning ritual. At 5:45, Michael was in the kitchen, starting the coffee and spreading blueprints across the table. The Morrison construction project in Troy was entering a critical phase, and he wanted to review the electrical plans one more time before the crew started work that morning. He took his responsibilities seriously, and his attention to detail was part of what made him such a valued supervisor. Linda joined him in the kitchen at 6:15, as she did every morning. She wore her favorite pink robe and had already started mentally planning the day. Grocery shopping, Emma's dentist appointment at 3:30, picking up Tommy from baseball practice at 5. The comfortable rhythm of their morning conversation covered family logistics, weekend plans, and Michael's work schedule. "The Troy project is going really well," Michael told her over coffee and toast. "If we stay on schedule, we might finish 2 weeks early. That would mean a nice bonus check in May." Linda smiled. They'd been talking about finally finishing the basement that spring, turning it into a proper family room where the kids could hang out with friends. The bonus money would make that dream possible. At 6:20, Jake stumbled into the kitchen, already dressed for school but still rubbing sleep from his eyes. At 16, he was old enough to appreciate his father's work ethic and had started asking serious questions about learning the construction trade. "Dad, can I come to the job site this weekend?" Jake asked, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. "I want to see how you guys do the framing." "Sure, son," Michael replied, his face lighting up with pride. "Saturday morning, if your mom says it's okay, I'll show you how to read the blueprints." Emma appeared next, 12 years old, and already worried about a history test she had that afternoon. Michael helped her review dates while Linda packed lunches for all 3 children. Tommy, 8 and perpetually energetic, bounced into the kitchen last, chattering about his friend's new bike and whether they could ride to the park after school. At 6:28, Michael stood up from the table and began his departure routine. He kissed Linda goodbye at the kitchen counter, a quick but genuine kiss that spoke of 18 years of comfortable intimacy. He ruffled Tommy's hair, told Emma she'd do great on her test, and clapped Jake on the shoulder. "Be good for your mom today," he said to all 3 children, the same words he'd said nearly every morning of their lives. "I'll see you at dinner." He grabbed his lunchbox from the counter, picked up his Morrison construction jacket from the hook by the door, and walked to his 1989 Ford pickup truck parked in the driveway. It was 6:30 in the morning exactly. Michael Roberts was nothing if not punctual. Linda watched from the kitchen window as he backed out of the driveway, waving goodbye, as he always did. The truck's taillights disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, and Linda turned back to the morning chaos of getting 3 children ready for school. She had no way of knowing she would never see her husband again. The Morrison construction job site in Troy was a 25-minute drive from the Roberts home in Warren. Michael's route took him east on 8 Mile Road, then south on I-75, a path he'd traveled so many times he could probably drive it with his eyes closed. His crew expected him to arrive by 7 o'clock for the morning safety meeting, and Michael had never been late. At 7:15, when Michael hadn't appeared, his foreman, Dave Sullivan, assumed he was running late due to traffic. Detroit's morning rush hour could be unpredictable, and even the most reliable person occasionally got caught in unexpected delays. At 7:30, Dave called the Roberts house. Linda answered, surprised to hear from Michael's workplace so early. In the morning. "Is Michael feeling okay?" Dave asked. He's not here yet, and that's not like him. He left right on time this morning, Linda replied, a first flutter of worry stirring in her stomach. Maybe there's an accident on the freeway? Probably, Dave agreed. Tell him to call me when he gets in. But Michael never called. At 8 o'clock, Dave called the house again. This time Linda's worry was audible in her voice. He still hasn't called you? That's not like Michael at all. He would call if he was going to be late. At 8:30, Linda made her first call to the Michigan State Police, asking if there had been any accidents reported on I-75 that morning. There hadn't been. At 9 o'clock, Linda called Morrison Construction's main office, hoping Michael had gone there instead of directly to the job site for some reason. The receptionist confirmed that no one had seen or heard from Michael that morning. At 9:30, Linda was in her car, driving Michael's usual route to work, looking for any sign of his truck or evidence of what might have delayed him. She found nothing unusual, just normal morning traffic flowing smoothly along familiar roads. At 10 o'clock, Linda Roberts walked into the Warren Police Department and reported her husband missing. "Ma'am, we can't officially file a missing person report until he's been gone 24 hours, the desk sergeant explained gently. Sometimes people have emergencies or get called away suddenly. Give it until tomorrow morning." But Linda knew something was terribly wrong. In 18 years of marriage, Michael had never disappeared without explanation, never failed to call if he was going to be late, never left his family wondering where he was. The first break in the case came at 2:15 that afternoon. A security guard at an industrial complex near Detroit Metro Airport called the Warren Police to report an abandoned vehicle. A 1989 Ford pickup truck, blue with Morrison Construction decals, had been sitting in their parking lot since early morning. The license plate matched the information Linda had provided about Michael's truck. When police arrived at the scene, they found Michael's pickup parked in a far corner of the industrial lot, away from the main buildings and security cameras. The truck was unlocked, keys still in the ignition, with Michael's lunchbox sitting unopened on the passenger seat. His Morrison Construction jacket was folded neatly, in the back, along with his hard hat and work gloves. There was no sign of Michael Roberts anywhere. The location where his truck was found made no sense. The industrial complex was 15 miles southwest of his intended destination in Troy, in completely the wrong direction from his normal route to work. There was no reason for Michael to have been in that area, no business that would have taken him to that remote location. More puzzling still, there were no signs of struggle in or around the vehicle. The truck showed no damage, the contents were undisturbed, and there was no evidence of foul play. It appeared that Michael had simply parked his truck, removed his work jacket, and vanished. The disappearance of Michael Roberts launched an investigation that would consume the Warren Police Department's resources for months and leave investigators with more questions than answers. Detective Sarah Martinez, a 10-year veteran specializing in missing persons cases, was assigned to lead the investigation. She had worked dozens of disappearance cases, but few as perplexing as Michael Roberts. Most missing adults left some indication of their intentions: financial problems, relationship issues, health concerns, or behavioral changes that provided clues about why they might have disappeared. Michael Roberts appeared to have had none of these typical warning signs. From every angle we approached this case, Michael looked like a man who had absolutely no reason to disappear, Detective Martinez explained years later. Stable marriage, healthy children, steady job, no debt problems, no known enemies. On paper, he was living the American dream. The first 72 hours of the investigation focused on the basics: retracing Michael's steps, interviewing family and co-workers, and searching for any evidence of where he might have gone after abandoning his truck. Linda Roberts underwent extensive questioning about her marriage and Michael's state of mind. The questions were necessary but painful. Police needed to determine whether there had been problems in the relationship that might explain Michael's disappearance. They asked me everything, Linda remembered. Was Michael having an affair? Was he drinking? Gambling? Taking drugs? Were we having financial problems? Had he ever threatened to leave? Had he ever been violent? The answer to every question was no. Linda provided bank statements showing the family's stable, if modest, financial situation. She gave police access to Michael's personal belongings, his mail, his phone records, anything that might provide clues. She submitted to a polygraph test and passed without question. Michael's co-workers painted a consistent picture of a reliable, conscientious man who took pride in his work and rarely discussed personal problems. Dave Sullivan, his foreman, told investigators that Michael had been excited about the Troy project and had shown no signs of wanting to quit or leave. Mike was one of those guys who lived for his family, Dave explained. Every conversation somehow came back to his kids, what Jake was learning in school, how proud he was of Emma's piano playing, some funny thing Tommy had said. That's not the kind of man who just walks away. The investigation expanded to include Michael's extended family, childhood friends, and acquaintances from his neighborhood and church. The picture that emerged was remarkably consistent. Michael Roberts was a devoted family man with no apparent secrets, no hidden problems, and no reason to disappear voluntarily. The search for Michael himself was equally intensive. Police coordinated with volunteer groups to search wooded areas, abandoned buildings, and waterways throughout southeastern Michigan. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the state, and his case was featured on local news broadcasts. Hundreds of tips poured in from people who thought they had seen Michael, but each lead ultimately proved false. Gas station attendants, restaurant servers, and hotel clerks from across Michigan and neighboring states reported possible sightings, but follow-up investigations never confirmed that any of these encounters had actually involved Michael Roberts. The mystery of his truck's location remained the most puzzling aspect of the case. The industrial complex where it was found employed 300 people, but none of them recognized Michael's photograph or remembered seeing him in the area. Security footage from nearby businesses was reviewed, but the cameras hadn't captured the parking lot where his truck was discovered. The truck location was the key piece of evidence, but it didn't make sense, Detective Martinez admitted. There was no logical reason for Michael to have been in that area. No businesses he'd worked with, no friends or family connections, nothing that would explain why he drove 15 miles out of his way to abandon his vehicle there. As weeks turned into months, investigators began to consider more sinister possibilities. Perhaps Michael had been the victim of a random crime, approached by criminals while stopped for gas or food, forced to drive to the industrial complex, and then kidnapped or killed. But this theory had problems too. There was no evidence of withdrawal from Michael's bank accounts, no ransom demands, no witnesses to any suspicious activity. The case generated significant media attention throughout the Detroit area. Michael's disappearance was featured on local television news, in newspaper articles, and eventually on national programs like Unsolved Mysteries. The exposure generated thousands of additional tips, but none led to Michael or provided credible information about what had happened to him. The impact on the Roberts family was devastating and immediate. Linda found herself thrust into the role of single mother while simultaneously dealing with the trauma of her husband's disappearance and the stress of ongoing police investigation. She had to explain to 3 confused and frightened children why their father hadn't come home, while having no answers herself. Jake, at 16, tried to step into his father's role, taking on household responsibilities and trying to be strong for his mother and younger siblings. Emma became withdrawn and anxious, her grades suffering as she struggled to concentrate on school while worrying about her father. 8-year-old Tommy simply couldn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, asking every day when Michael would return. The kids kept asking questions I couldn't answer, Linda recalled. Where is Daddy? When is he coming back? Is he hurt? Is he dead? I didn't know what to tell them because I didn't know anything. The financial impact was immediate and severe. Michael's paycheck had supported the family, and while Linda received some assistance from family and the community, money became an urgent concern. She was forced to find work while managing 3 children and an ongoing investigation. As 1994 turned into 1995, the active investigation began to wind down. Police had followed every viable lead, interviewed hundreds of people, and searched thousands of square miles. They had found no trace of Michael Roberts and no credible evidence explaining his disappearance. In March of 1995, exactly 1 year after Michael's disappearance, Detective Martinez was forced to reclassify the case as cold. The file remained open, and any new information would be investigated, but there were no active leads to pursue. The Michael Roberts case was one of the most frustrating of my career, Detective Martinez reflected years later. We had a completely reliable family man who vanished without a trace, leaving behind no evidence of why he left or where he went. It was like he just decided to step out of his life and disappear into thin air. The Roberts family was left to build a new life, around a void they couldn't understand. Linda eventually accepted that Michael might never be found, but she never stopped hoping for answers. The children grew up with the strange burden of having a father who was neither present nor definitively gone, a ghost who haunted their family's history. For 15 years, they would live with the assumption that something terrible had happened to Michael Roberts. The truth, when it finally emerged, would prove that their instincts were right about one thing. Something terrible had indeed happened to their family. But the perpetrator wasn't a stranger or criminal. It was Michael himself. The 15 years that followed Michael Roberts' disappearance were a testament to human resilience and the complex ways families adapt to inexplicable loss. For Linda and her 3 children, life became an ongoing process of learning to live with questions that seemed to have no answers. Linda Roberts faced the monumental challenge of reinventing herself, from wife and mother to single parent and breadwinner, all while processing her own grief and confusion about Michael's disappearance. In the months immediately following March 23, 1994, well-meaning friends and family members offered theories and advice that ranged from helpful to hurtful. People meant well, but some of the things they said were devastating, Linda recalled years later. Some suggested that Michael must have been having an affair, or that he'd gotten involved with criminals, or that there must have been problems in our marriage I wasn't admitting. Others insisted he would come back someday, that I should wait for him. I was trying to figure out how to survive day by day, and everyone seemed to have opinions about what I should think or feel. Financial necessity forced Linda to find employment quickly. With no college degree and 15 years out of the workforce, her options were limited. She eventually found work as a receptionist at a private dental office, a job that provided steady income and health insurance for the children, but left the family in much more modest circumstances than they'd known before. The house on Maple Street, once a symbol of Michael's hard work and the family's stability, became a financial burden Linda could barely manage. She took on a second job cleaning office buildings at night, working while the children slept and grabbing a few hours of rest before starting her day job. The exhaustion was constant, but the alternative was losing the family home. Jake Roberts, thrust into the role of man of the house at 16, struggled with responsibilities no teenager should have to carry. He took part-time jobs to help with household expenses, his dreams of college fading as family financial needs took priority. His relationship with his father's memory became complicated. Grief mixed with resentment over being forced to grow up too quickly. "I was angry at my dad for leaving us," Jake admitted years later. "Even though I knew something bad had probably happened to him, part of me was furious that he wasn't there to take care of Mom, to help Emma with her problems, to teach Tommy how to throw a baseball. I was 16 years old trying to be a father to my little brother, and I had no idea what I was doing." Emma Roberts, 12 when her father disappeared, experienced the loss differently. She had been Daddy's little girl, and Michael's disappearance left her feeling abandoned and confused about her own worth. She struggled academically and socially, developing anxiety that made normal childhood activities feel overwhelming. "I kept thinking that if I was a better daughter, maybe Dad would come back," Emma remembered. "I'd clean my room perfectly, do all my homework, help Mom with everything I could think of. I thought maybe if I was good enough, he'd realize he missed us and find a way to come home." Tommy, only 8 when Michael disappeared, had the most fragmented memories of his father, but perhaps the most complicated relationship with the loss. As he grew older, his understanding of what had happened evolved, but the fundamental absence remained a defining feature of his childhood. "Tommy used to talk to Dad's picture every night before bed," Linda recalled. "He'd tell him about school, about baseball, about problems with his friends. It was heartbreaking and sweet at the same time. He was maintaining a relationship with someone who wasn't there." The community of Warren rallied around the Roberts family in the immediate aftermath of Michael's disappearance, but as months turned to years, that support naturally faded. People moved on with their own lives, while the Roberts family remained frozen in a kind of suspended animation, unable to grieve properly for someone who might still be alive, but unable to hope for a return that never came. Linda made the difficult decision to have Michael declared legally dead 7 years after his disappearance, in 2001. The process was emotionally brutal but financially necessary. It allowed her to access his life insurance and finally gain clear title to the house. Yet even with legal closure, the family's emotional questions remained unanswered. Having him declared legally dead felt like giving up, Linda explained. But we needed the insurance money to keep the house, and Jake was about to start college. I had to choose between holding on to hope and taking care of my children's practical needs. Throughout the 2000s, cold case investigations occasionally brought renewed attention to Michael's disappearance. Detective Martinez, who had retired but maintained interest in the case, would periodically review new leads or apply updated investigative techniques to old evidence. DNA technology advanced, databases expanded, and new methods for tracking missing persons were developed, but none brought clarity to Michael Roberts's fate. Jake graduated high school and, thanks to his father's life insurance, was able to attend community college part-time while working full-time. He studied business administration with the practical goal of increasing his earning potential to help support his family. His childhood dreams of following his father into construction had been replaced by the pragmatic need to build financial security. Emma struggled more with the transition to adulthood. She battled depression and anxiety throughout high school, requiring counseling to help process her complicated grief. She excelled academically when she could focus, but emotional turbulence made consistency difficult. After graduation, she spent 2 years working various jobs while trying to figure out her direction in life. Tommy grew up with the most normal childhood possible under the circumstances, but he carried his own unique burden. As the baby of the family, he received the most protection from the harsh realities of their situation. But this also meant he often felt disconnected from the family's shared experience of loss. My brothers and sister all had clear memories of Dad, Tommy reflected as an adult. I had fragments, playing catch in the backyard, sitting on his shoulders, him reading me bedtime stories. But I wasn't sure if these were real memories or if I'd constructed them from family photos and stories. It made me feel like I'd lost him twice. Once, when he disappeared, and again when I realized my memories of him might not even be real. As the 15th anniversary of Michael's disappearance approached in 2009, the Roberts family had built a new life around his absence. Linda had been promoted to office manager at the dental practice. Jake was 28 and working in commercial insurance, having discovered an aptitude for sales and client relations. Emma, 24, had finally found her calling in social work, drawn to helping other families in crisis. Tommy was 20, attending college, and studying education, with the goal of becoming an elementary school teacher. They had survived, even thrived in many ways, despite the enormous challenge of Michael's disappearance. They had learned to live with uncertainty, to build meaning around loss, and to find happiness despite the hole in their family's history. But they had never stopped wondering what really happened to Michael Roberts. The answer was about to come from the most unexpected source imaginable. October 15th, 2009. Jake Roberts was cleaning out his grandmother's house following her funeral when he made a discovery that would rewrite everything his family thought they knew about Michael Roberts's disappearance 15 years earlier. Grandma Dorothy Roberts had been Michael's mother, a tough, practical woman who had raised 5 children during Detroit's industrial decline and never lost her faith that her missing son would eventually be found. She had died peacefully at 81, taking with her what the family assumed were the last direct memories of Michael's childhood and character. Dorothy had lived in the same small house on Detroit's east side for 47 years. After her funeral, the family faced the overwhelming task of sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. Jake, as the oldest grandchild and the one with the most flexible work schedule, volunteered to handle the bulk of the cleaning. Grandma was a pack rat, Jake recalled. She kept everything: old newspapers, broken appliances, clothes, from the 1960s. The attic was so full you could barely move around up there. I spent days just carrying boxes down to see what was worth keeping. Most of the boxes contained exactly what you'd expect from an elderly woman's attic: holiday decorations, old photographs, baby clothes from long-grown grandchildren. But one wooden crate, pushed far back under the eaves and covered with a dusty tarp, contained something that shouldn't have been there. The crate was labeled Michael's papers, important, in Dorothy's careful handwriting. Inside were documents that Jake initially assumed were mementos his grandmother had kept from his father's childhood: report cards, certificates, maybe letters from his years in construction work. What he found instead changed everything. At the bottom of the crate, beneath a layer of old tax returns and insurance policies, was a manila envelope marked "Private, Dorothy Only." Inside the envelope were documents that made Jake's hands shake as he read them: birth certificates, Social Security applications, and school enrollment forms for children Jake had never heard of. 3 children named Roberts, with birth dates that placed them at ages 4, 7, and 9 in 1994. Three children who shared a father named Michael Roberts, but whose mother was listed as Jennifer Wilson, not Linda Roberts. At first I thought there was some mistake, Jake remembered. Maybe these were documents for distant relatives, or maybe Grandma had mixed up paperwork from different families. But as I kept reading, the details were too specific, too consistent. These were real documents for real children who had my father as their father. More shocking still was a collection of photographs tucked between the official documents. Pictures of Michael Roberts, definitely Michael, unmistakably Jake's father, with a woman and 3 young children. The photos showed birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. They showed Michael pushing a little girl on a swing, teaching a boy to ride a bicycle, holding a toddler on his lap while reading a bedtime story. The photos were dated, and the dates told a story that made Jake physically ill. Some of the pictures had been taken before March 23, 1994, meaning Michael had been living a double life while he was still coming home to Linda and the children every night. Others were dated after his disappearance, proving that he hadn't vanished or died but had simply chosen to live with his other family full-time. The final piece of evidence in the envelope was perhaps the most devastating. A handwritten letter from Michael to his mother, dated April 10, 1994, 18 days after his supposed disappearance. The letter was brief but devastating in its implications. "Mom, I know this is hard to understand, but I couldn't keep living 2 lives anymore. Linda and the kids will be better off thinking something happened to me than knowing I chose to leave them. Jennifer and the little ones need me more right now. Please don't try to contact me or tell anyone about this letter. Let Linda collect the insurance money and move on with her life. I'll be in touch when I can. Michael." Jake sat in his grandmother's dusty attic, surrounded by boxes of old memories, and realized that his entire understanding of his family's history had been built on a lie. His father hadn't been the victim of a crime or accident. He had been a man living a double life who had chosen one family over another. The practical implications hit him immediately. If Michael was alive and had been alive all along, Linda's legal declaration of death was based on false premises. The insurance money they had received, the benefits, the whole financial foundation of their survival over the past 15 years was potentially fraudulent, even though they had acted in good faith. But the emotional implications were far worse. Michael Roberts hadn't been taken from his family by cruel fate. He had abandoned them deliberately. Every night, Linda had cried herself to sleep, wondering what had happened to her husband. Every birthday and holiday the children had spent missing their father. Every financial struggle and family crisis they had endured alone. All of it was unnecessary suffering caused by Michael's choice to walk away. Jake spent 2 hours in that attic, reading and rereading the documents, studying the photographs, trying to process what he had discovered. He felt like he was looking at evidence of a crime, but the criminal was his own father, and the victims were everyone he loved most. The hardest part was realizing that Grandma Dorothy had known the truth all along. She had kept Michael's secret for 15 years, allowing her daughter-in-law and grandchildren to suffer while protecting her son's decision to abandon his family. Every time she had comforted Linda with promises that Michael would be found, every time she had told the children that their father was in heaven watching over them, she had been lying. "I felt betrayed by everyone," Jake recalled. "Not just by my dad, but by my grandmother, who I'd trusted and loved. She had watched us struggle and grieve and rebuild our lives, and she knew the whole time that it was all based on my father's lie." Jake carefully repacked the documents and photographs, locked them in his car, and finished cleaning out the rest of the house in a daze. He drove home that evening with the weight of knowledge that would destroy his family's carefully constructed understanding of their history. The question now was whether he should use that knowledge to find his father, or whether some secrets were too devastating to reveal. Jake Roberts spent 3 sleepless nights deciding whether to tell his mother and siblings what he had discovered in their grandmother's attic. The documents proved that Michael Roberts was alive and had been living with another family since 1994. But revealing this truth would destroy the peace his family had finally found after 15 years of healing. On the 4th day, Jake made his choice. He called Linda and asked her to gather Emma and Tommy at the house on Maple Street. When they were all together in the living room where they had spent so many evenings missing their father, Jake spread the photographs and documents on the coffee table and told them the devastating truth. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Linda collapsed into sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. Not grief for a dead husband this time, but rage at a living one who had chosen to abandon his family. Emma became hysterically angry, screaming about the years of therapy and depression she had endured because of her father's death. Tommy, now 20, simply stared at the photographs in stunned silence. "How could he do this to us?" Linda kept asking. "How could he let us think he was dead? How could he watch us struggle and never help us?" Using the address from the documents, Jake hired a private investigator to locate Michael Roberts. It took less than a week. Michael was living in Sterling Heights, Michigan, only 37 miles from the family he had abandoned. He worked as a project manager for a construction company, lived in a comfortable house with Jennifer Wilson and their 3 children, and had built exactly the same kind of life he had left behind. The confrontation, when it finally came, was anticlimactic. Jake appeared at Michael's door on a Saturday morning in November 2009. Michael opened the door, saw his eldest son for the first time in 15 years, and simply said, "I wondered when this day would come." Michael's explanation was pathetic and self-serving. He claimed he had fallen in love with Jennifer and couldn't choose between his families, so he had decided to stage his own disappearance rather than hurt Linda with the truth of his affair. He insisted he had thought she would be better off, believing he was dead, rather than knowing he had chosen someone else. "He actually expected us to understand," Jake recalled with bitter amazement. "He said he did it to protect us from pain, as if 15 years of thinking he was dead was somehow better than knowing he was a liar and a cheat." Legal consequences followed swiftly. Michael was charged with insurance fraud and identity fraud. The insurance company demanded repayment of the death benefit, throwing the Roberts family into financial crisis despite their innocence in the deception. But perhaps the cruelest revelation was learning that Michael's other children, now 19, 22, and 24, had grown up knowing about Jake, Emma, and Tommy. Michael had told them about his first family, but had forbidden them from making contact, claiming it would be too painful for everyone involved. Today, Linda Roberts has remarried and found genuine happiness with a man who chose her every day for 10 years and counting. Jake, Emma, and Tommy have maintained no relationship with their father, though they have built connections with their half-siblings, who were also victims of Michael's deception. Michael Roberts got exactly what he wanted. He chose a family and kept them. But he lost the love and respect of the children he abandoned, and he will forever be remembered not as a victim of mysterious circumstances, but as a man who broke his family's hearts twice. Once when he left, and once when they learned he had never loved them enough to stay.